Just make sure. Okay, here's your clicker. Should be good.
Okay, well, I'm going to get started then if you're all good.
Absolutely.
Hi to all the virtual people and everybody in the room. Today we're going to be talking about food and mental health. And we have one of those things as you're all eating. But this is actually one of my favorite presentations to go over because it's very interesting. There's a lot of stuff that you might think is no brainer. You've heard this 1,000 times, but then there's some stuff that might be new to you about just how intertwined that our digestive system is with our mental health and our brain and our nervous system. They're actually connected a lot more than we think. And my name is Allie Poulter. I've been here what feels like hundreds of times. So you probably recognize my face, but if not, I'm from Penn Medicine Doylestown Hospital. I'm a health educator. I go through a certification exam and training specifically on a lot of health topics, nutrition being one of them. So this is right in my wheelhouse. And my background is in public health. So we focus on a lot about whole person health, and I'll get to talking about that a little bit too. But as far as what we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to go over the basics of mental health, what it is. We kind of all know what mental health is. We've heard it a lot, but just to kind of really break it down, refresher maybe. And this presentation kind of builds, each part builds on one another. Because then we're going to move into about how food affects your mood. And then we'll wrap it up with how maybe how you're feeling, your mood will affect the types of foods you might want to pick. Some goals we have, just describe how mental health is going to impact your total health, really focus on that whole person health. Sometimes people like to put mental health over there and it's like, okay, I'm not sick, I'm doing good, but we want to really just remind ourselves that how we're doing in our heads affects our whole body. Understand how that the food you're going to pick day to day, the snacks you choose are going to affect maybe how you feel in your mind. And then identify some foods that we can work to incorporate a bit more if we want to boost our mental health through our diet. And again, really this starts with mental health. And like I said, my background being public health, really love to stress this health triangle. I just put this here as a diagram to just really outline like a visual for that. And a lot of people think, okay, my health is, I'm not sick. You know, I have enough energy in the morning. I can get up. Nothing's aching too bad that I can still do my job and everything. And, you know, I'm able to exercise. And that's our physical health component. And for a lot of people, it kind of stops there. I'm healthy. I'm just going to keep going. But there's also the component of social health. You know, us as humans, we're very social creatures, whether we like it or not. You know, some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. We like maybe some of us here are more social and outgoing than others, but talking to people, interacting with one another is an important part of everybody's health. And sometimes our physical health, if we're not feeling well enough, we don't go out and we don't talk to our friends or our family. We don't engage socially in the ways that we need to for our whole person health. And then that starts falling short. And then our physical health can suffer too. And then, of course, what we're going to talk about today, our mental health, being, you know, how we're feeling. That can be, you know, you wake up and are you feeling energized for the day, or are you looking at the day going, okay, I'm going to get through this? And a lot of these other parts of the triangle can affect your mental health. Again, if you haven't engaged with your loved ones recently, you haven't called up family that you haven't seen, or you don't want to talk to your kids or your spouse, you're just not feeling it, can impact your mental health as well as your mental health impacting that. You know, it's a common, if you're not in a good mood, you had a rough day at work or traffic was bad, you're not going to be in the best mind space to come home and have great interactions with the people in your house. So, you know, it's a no-brainer. These are things that we realize, okay, if one part of this triangle is not doing great, the rest might suffer as well. But just as a reflection and reminder that they do all connect with each other. If we are not, exercising, or we're not feeling well if we have, chronic illness or even just a cold, sometimes that affects our mental health. Some people can really take getting a cold or not feeling well hard, and it can affect their motivation to engage in hobbies, even if physically maybe they could, they're just not feeling great. And, if you're in a position where you can't get out of the house or you can't move around as much, maybe you can't engage in those hobbies or talk to people. So again, they all connect, you know, just saying the same thing. And then with mental health, again, this is no brainer stuff that, we kind of all know, but just to get into some definitions to clarify. And this is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, so SAMHSA. This is just how they define it. So mental health includes emotional, psychological, social well-being. So how we're doing socially is already included in that mental health. And then it's going to affect how we think, feel, and act. So as opposed to, I think a lot of people just think mental health, anxiety, depression, it's a lot more than just that. And it determines how we are going to handle stress in our lives, how we're relating to others, and how we make choices. So how we're feeling in our minds is going to affect all of these different categories of life. And just to emphasize, it's more than just, oh, that extra part of our health that, sometimes we talk about in May, mental health month, but otherwise, I'm doing fine. It's gonna, how we're feeling, even if it's just our mood, our disposition, it's gonna affect how we handle stress. If you're already depleted from the day and something happens, like, maybe your kid drops a glass on the floor and it breaks, and as opposed to being like, oh, it's okay, we'll clean it up, sometimes if we're already depleted, we're going to react worse to that and be like, oh my gosh, why did you do that? So it's going to affect every little thing. And again, these are common mental health conditions that a lot of people talk about. These are the most well-known ones, but because they're common, just to break it down, anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder. So this is a persistent worry or fear, often with no direct cause. And with this, I like to emphasize it's normal to feel anxious. It's normal to feel those butterflies or nervousness if you're doing something you haven't normally done. Maybe it's like a long drive to a place you've not been to before, or if you're not used to presenting and you're presenting for the first time, that can definitely cause anxiety. And that's completely normal. A lot of people react to normal life situations and are presented with feelings of mental distress, but it's temporary. Now, when anxiety spans longer than that stimulus, so you've left the presentation or you accomplished the task that was causing anxiety, but you still feel it, or you're waking up with fear, not knowing what's really causing it. It's just that unsettling feeling starting to impact your life. You're maybe making choices that you wouldn't normally, avoiding situations that you wouldn't normally. That's when it's important to talk to a mental health professional, talk to your family doctor just to start the conversation, because it's impeding your life. You don't want to let these feelings impede your everyday life. And the same with major depressive disorder. This is causing people diagnosed with this feeling consumed by a dark mood. And oftentimes it's more quiet than that, where it's just a subtle disinterest. Someone who's developing a depressive disorder might just stop wanting to do these things they normally do. Just a slow, I'm not interested in that. Maybe it's a withdrawal from social situations they normally would. I'm not going to go, out Thursday night with you guys anymore. I'm just not feeling it. So it can often be a little more subtle than that dark mood. And again, I like to emphasize it's normal to feel sad and down with a major life change, especially if you move houses, get a new job, you lose a loved one. There's just normal reactions our brain goes through. So feeling down, depressed in the moment is normal. Again, it's just when that extends longer than that stimuli. And everyone's adjustment period is different, but that, okay, this is affecting my life. And sometimes it's a loved one that says to you, hey, you've been different lately. Maybe you should talk to someone about that. That's kind of that point where maybe you can draw that line. But just good to remind of these common mental health conditions. These are the two most common categories, and it breaks down, there's phobias, there's panic disorders, with depressive disorder, there's manic depressive disorder, there's different ones, but these are just like the two umbrella ones. And I like to bring this up because there is a stigma, even with all that we talk about in our society and our culture now, there's still, a stigma that exists. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of people think I'm healthy, I don't have a sickness, I'm good. We're not going to talk about mental health until it comes up. And again, the stigma, negative attitudes, beliefs, stereotypes. I think we all kind of have a working knowledge of what stigma means and stigma around mental health, but just to get the definitions down. And this can be a big barrier for people seeking health. Maybe they've noticed a change in their life and they're not super happy with it. They think there's a problem, but they don't want their friends to think anything bad about them if they start talking to a therapist. There's, sometimes still just that fear of addressing it. And so what we can do is just talk about it more, talk to our friends more about how they're doing, talk about how you're doing, and, just breaking down those barriers, trying to, break up those stereotypes. And I just have a couple myths versus facts to kind of roll into our next topic. So one myth is that people think, okay, mental health issues won't affect me. This is not something, I'll deal with. Other people maybe, I'll support them, but I'm not going to be affected. But recent research shows that 1 in 5 Americans have experienced a mental health condition in a given year. So it can be anyone. Anyone can experience these things. Again, it's a normal reaction to changes in life, but sometimes, our brain is very complex and we might have these symptoms longer than that stimuli is present. And another myth is, well, I can't really do anything to help someone with a mental health issue. They got to deal with it themselves. They'll work on getting help. But the fact is that, friends and family, loved ones can make a big difference. Even just talking about this, in your inner circles and your family, they can encourage someone to take care of themselves, remind them that they matter to others. Very important. And another myth is that you can't prevent mental health conditions. Now, a lot of mental health conditions can be tied to a genetic link. So, our family, it runs in our family. It's just something you can't avoid. But there are lifestyle factors that can contribute. And a lot of prevention just on mental health and well-being can include focus on avoiding risk factors. So treating your physical health with care, your social health with care, can help put you at a better stance if something were to happen in your life where you're thrown off a little bit, your mental health might take a plummet. If you're working on your physical health, your social health, you'll be able to give yourself a little bit better of a standpoint going forward with that. And so going from mental health, kind of focusing on mood. So mood, that affects everyone in our day-to-day lives. It's a relatively stable state. Whether we are aware of it or not, we all have a mood kind of going on, whether it's like stable mood or a bad mood or a good mood. Hopefully it's a good mood, but it's a relatively stable state, a lot of times termed positive or negative. We all know when we, wake up in a bad mood or a good mood, we just kind of feel it. But just like mental health, it's going to impact how we think, we feel, we act. So this is a kind of another no-brainer, but if you're in a bad mood, you're not going to react as even-tempered as maybe you would. If you're in a bad mood and you're in traffic and someone cuts you off, you might be a lot more explosive, and as opposed to, oh, maybe they're in a rush, whatever. If we're already in a bad mood, we're like, come on, what was that about? So it's going to affect everything. And it is a component of your mental health and well-being. So your mood is kind of that like underlying layer of how you're doing in totality. And the difference between mood and emotions are kind of subtle. From psychology today, they kind of differentiate them in 3 ways. So moods are longer lasting. So you can have, emotions usually as a response to something. That's a normal reaction. A lot of chemicals in our brains are involved in how we are feeling emotionally, but our moods can kind of last over a longer period. And moods are kind of just that general feeling. Like I said, that base layer of how you're doing. You might not realize it, but it's going to creep up on you. And then moods tend to be less intense than emotions. Like I said, usually the emotions are a reaction to something, whereas your moods are kind of that general disposition. And they can shift throughout the day. You know, you can wake up in a bad mood, but someone puts you in a good mood. But again, it's that lower feeling. And I think the reason to differentiate this is because this topic called food in your mood. And while food can impact your emotions in the short term, where you're like happy to eat something, or if something was really gross, you could be disappointed about it. But the moods are something you don't really realize that your diet might be affecting. It's a kind of, like I said, that base layer, that underlying feeling, and you don't realize it until you maybe react to something and you're like, oh, I am in a bad mood. I'm not feeling too great today. So just to differentiate those two. And there's a lot of factors that influence mood. I don't really have to say a ton of these out loud. You probably know we're tired, that can impact our mood, or if we're energetic. Stress can definitely, social interactions can, like I said, someone can compliment your outfit and you can feel really great about it. That can put you in a good mood, or someone yells at you or you have a really negative interaction that can really stick with you whether you want it to or not. World events, the news can really put someone mostly in a bad mood these days. So being aware of that. The weather, this one I like to emphasize because Monday and Tuesday of this week, I was in a great mood, but today I don't really like what's going on out there. So that one hopefully is passing by shortly. But our overall health, again, that's our physical health, how we're doing. If we have a chronic condition that might impact our mood, or short-term sickness. Hormones, this talk isn't on hormones, but that could be a whole other topic. Men have a 24-hour cycle, women 28-day cycle, and then throughout our lives, our hormones shift and change. So a younger person might have completely different mood fluctuations than an older person with different hormones. So again, that's a whole other topic, but something to be aware of can significantly impact your mood. Now, getting into kind of more of what we're talking about today, hunger. If anyone here gets hangry, I do, so I'm not judging. And then our diet. So the things we choose to eat. And that's kind of how we'll roll into food and your mood. So this is where we get into a little bit of the science of food and your mood, your mental health. And we'll start with talking about the gut microbiome. This is a hot topic in nutrition. So if you've heard of it, I don't know if anyone has heard of gut microbiome, or I've, maybe heard the term, not really know what it is. But that is your personal crew of 1,000+ unique bacteria in your intestines. And when I say gut, that's kind of what I'm referring to, your intestines. And that might seem kind of freaky, like what are they doing there? This is my body, but we're actually we build them in the first year of our life, and they stick with us throughout our life, and they really help a lot of the things that we do. This bacteria is helping our body. It's like that symbiotic relationship, and they help you digest food. They help you absorb nutrients in your intestines, and help defend against intruders. So the body microbiome is really important in the immune system. We have bacteria on our skin that help provide a barrier. And then once in our body, we have bacteria in our gut. So if we eat something kind of funky, sometimes it can help with that. I mean, there's no preventing if you did get food poisoning, but sometimes your gut bacteria can help with that. And then this ecosystem starts to build early on in the first 1,000 days of life, and then throughout the first year of your life. And a lot of the reason too, if you've ever heard you don't want to give a child under the age of 1 honey, is because there can be bacteria in that honey and they haven't really developed that microbiome yet, and their intestines are still new. So we, throughout our lives, kind of have this gut microbiome. It develops early on in our childhood there. But there can be things that we do that change our gut microbiome. And again, what it helps you absorb the nutrients in your food, helps you with that digestion, and then defend against pathogens. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, what do these bacteria in my gut have to do with my mood and my mental health. So I'm going to get into this relatively new field, newish field, examining how our gut and our brain are very connected. And it's called nutritional psychiatry, but people often call to the gut brain connection. And basically, what it looks at is this chemical serotonin. And you probably heard serotonin, especially in the mental health discussion. And it does a lot more than our emotions. It can really help regulate our sleep, our bone health, our digestion, how it is helping maybe our nausea. If we're nauseous, serotonin usually has a part to play. How we heal, wound healing, and blood clotting. All of these chemicals in our brain rarely do one job, and serotonin does a lot of different jobs. Like this diagram kind of says, it's the happy chemical, the happy hormone. That's kind of its claim to fame when it comes to our mood. But again, it does a lot more of these things. We need serotonin to regulate that circadian rhythm, and it works in our digestion, which this diagram kind of shows. This is not a biology class, but I'll just give you the brief overview. This is your intestinal lining right there, the orange cells. And these green cells produce serotonin in our intestine. And actually, 90% of serotonin is produced in our intestinal lining. And that's our, so also known as our gut. So if you can see this chart, all these green dots kind of illustrate that serotonin production in our intestine. So that's why the state of our gut is so important to how we're feeling. Because serotonin, its claim to fame is that happy chemical, that happy hormone. 90% of where it's being produced is in our intestine, directly involved in digestion. And this is not the only connection between our brain and gut, because there's another biological component in our cranial nerves. So we have tons of cranial nerves going from our nervous system to parts of our face. A lot of them impact our eyes, our mouth, ears, but our longest cranial nerve is called the vagus nerve. And if you've ever heard about that, in a lot of deep breathing, calming exercises work on the vagus nerve to kind of calm us down, because it passes all the way down past our heart, past our lungs, past all of these organs here, and right into our intestine. So it acts as a telephone line from our brain right into our gut, kind of that two-way pathway that they easily communicate with each other. So not only are there a lot of hormones involved in our gut that affect our brain, but we have a direct nervous system connection into our intestine. And so a lot of people, some people will call the intestine the brain of our digestive system, or the brain in our gut. So that's kind of why, because it communicates directly with our brain. And oftentimes this is involved in the enteric nervous system. So then that leads us into talking about the gut-brain axis. So really, what does this pathway of communication do? How are they communicating and talking with each other? And you might already have examples in your life you can reference to this with your gut and your brain. So, for example, when your stomach is full, your intestines are full, you're getting a signal that you have to go to the bathroom. That's the number one most common one. That's kind of how we're able to feel, okay, all right, it's time to go to the bathroom. We know what that feeling means. But in other situations, sometimes maybe we're anxious or stressed. If anyone experiences any digestive issues from that, some people can experience nausea or queasiness or the urge to go to the bathroom in stressful situations. And that's that direct communication between your gut and your brain. And also a not so fun one, but sometimes when people travel far from their home, with your mind, your brain is perceiving a new, maybe unsafe, different environment, and you might have trouble going to the bathroom because of that. That gut brain connection is so interconnected. There's no way for your intestines to know, okay, I'm in a hotel right now, but sometimes your brain is just not comfortable there. So they're both impacted. And there's a couple specific messages that are sent. So the brain's responsible for kind of making sure the intestines have enough nutrients, delivering the nutrients to the intestines, and managing that gut microbiome. You'll get signals that something's amiss if that microbiome's out of whack. You're not having the right bacteria in your gut. And movement, again, if you're looking at a dinner plate you just ate and you kind of feel that, oh, I might have to go to the bathroom right after. It's not the food running right through you. It's your brain sending signals. Okay, we got to make room for this meal we just ate. And that's kind of helping you out, communicating. And then also secretion. Again, with that big meal you're looking at, your brain is saying, all right, intestines, secrete more enzymes. We're going to digest this now. And in turn, your gut is going to send messages back up to your brain. Those neurotransmitters, specifically serotonin, we talked about, 90% of it is produced in your gut. And that kind of helps how our brain's functioning too. It can affect how we're feeling. And when your brain is receiving these signals, it can affect kind of your general overall mood. And it can lead to an increased risk of anxiety, depressed mood, or stress too if something is out of whack in your gut. Specifically, we'll get into what in a moment. I think it's also important to address GI issues. I come from a family, a lot of people have gastrointestinal issues, IBD, there's also IBS, celiac disease can cause a lot of inflammation, if you're coming in contact with gluten. They're just different conditions, and these can take a toll on mental health in a lot of ways. First of all, it can be very uncomfortable when you're not in total control of how you're feeling in your intestines and having to be near a bathroom. But also, again, just identifying that inflammation in the gut can lead to changes in your brain because you're not getting all that serotonin. So people diagnosed with conditions like Crohn's, colitis do have an increased risk of developing mental health conditions, not only because it is a chronic disease and that can be a big life change, but because of the gut brain connection. And then also what we're talking about today, certain foods can cause your gut microbiome to suffer. And if your gut's not doing well, you can assume the brain is suffering in conjunction with that. So some food choices that can do damage to your gut. And again, I think this is a no-brainer. These are going to be the things that you always hear to limit and to avoid. But we'll get into specifically why they're bad for your gut. First being ultra-processed foods. We've heard a lot about this in the nutritional space lately. I feel like the conversation's just going to keep continuing. The way I like to define it, and I've seen it defined, is ingredients rarely used in kitchen. So you're really far from those, that egg, milk, butter, salt, pepper. It's just, that McDonald's cheeseburger is very far removed from that original ingredient list of, farm fresh fruits and vegetables. And it can cause inflammation in the gut. Things like soda, packaged snacks, cake mixes, frozen pizza even fall into this category of ultra processed. They're usually packed with emulsifiers, added sugars. They taste really good. That's why these all are put into them to make us want them more. But this really disrupts the gut microbiome, all of these additives. And it does increase the risk of developing inflammatory bowel conditions like Crohn's, colitis, the more that you eat these ultra processed and packaged foods. Red meat also has had a link for disrupting that gut microbiome. Certain animal proteins, especially processed meats, hot dogs, sausages, deli meats, can decrease that beneficial good bacteria. So decreasing the good bacteria can lead to more of the bacteria that maybe cause bloating, discomfort, because there's bacteria in our gut, but sometimes depending on what we eat, it's not all going to help us. So that gut diversity also decreases with a diet really heavy in red meats. And just like you need lots of different animal species and trees out in the ecosystem to create a good, diverse environment, your gut does need a lot of diversity. Just one bacteria is not going to help you as much as a lot of different strains of bacteria. And there's been recent research that, links a high consumption diet of red meat to an increased risk of colon cancer. So again, just Colon Cancer Awareness Month, being aware of that component in your diet. And then added sugars, things like soda, candy, cookies, ice cream. A lot of these are ultra processed too, but they do decrease that gut diversity as well. And they feed that unhealthy gut bacteria. So that bacteria that causes bloating, discomfort, diarrhea, constipation, that bacteria loves those added sugars. And so oftentimes if you have something, a high diet full of sugary stuff, you might feel more bloating, or you might notice that your bowel movements are a little more irregular. And unfortunately, the answer isn't always those diet drinks. You might think, okay, good alternative, artificial sweeteners. A lot more research still needs to be done on the long-term effects of those, as well as the research we do have shows it decreases that gut diversity too. So, a lot of it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to regulate that blood sugar, maybe jumping to diet can be a good thing to break that habit first, but you really want to work on decreasing those even sweetened beverages as a whole, whether it's sugar or, aspartame, an alternative like that. But on a more positive end, what can we focus on that is good for our gut, to make our intestines happy? So probiotics, this is what we've heard ages old as time. Yogurts, sauerkraut, things that are cultured, they have bacteria in them. And the bacteria in these foods that are fermented, cultured, have beneficial digestive properties and can help bolster your gut diversity as well. Sometimes people think, okay, if I just, eat this yogurt, it'll be good. Usually the effects are temporary unless you're doing it over a long period of time. So one yogurt every couple months isn't gonna, save the day. But if you make it a habit to get more probiotics in your diet, you might really see a difference, ongoing. And also prebiotics. And I thought this would be a good time to kind of identify the difference between those two, because you might hear them both and think, okay, what are these? So prebiotics are actually food for your healthy bacteria. So they are contained in a lot of foods we already eat. Some healthy ones include garlic, onions, wheat, soybeans, peas, stuff that really gives our healthy bacteria stuff to work on. And a lot of these include fiber, and fiber really helps lower our inflammation, manage GI symptoms. Now, some fiber might be better for our gut health than others. Soluble fiber that dissolves in water and helps lower inflammation. This can be found in high levels in beans, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and fruits and veggies. Higher in fruits and veggies like kiwi, avocado, artichokes, and grapefruit. But all fruits and veggies do have some form of fiber you can break down because they have that cell wall, and it gives your body something to do, something to work on. So how does this impact our mood? How does our intestinal state, and we've already kind of built the foundation as to why, but some like we talked about, common mental health struggles might be depression, feelings of anxiety, feelings of stress. And specifically talking about then what types of foods are going to cause these. So we know that our gut is highly involved in how our brain works, from that serotonin to that vagus nerve. So it's not a surprise that a lot of research now is showing up that foods that are bad for our gut health are bad for our brain. So what food types increase our risk of anxiety, depression, stress? Spoiler alert, it's everything that tastes good, unfortunately. But there are alternatives. But just breaking it down, refined sugars and carbohydrates. So this is our typical sweets. Just like I said, being bad for our gut can be bad for our mood and our mental health. So you think about these like our, processed cakes, candies, crackers that are high in sugar. This can also include enriched white bread and pasta. These things are known as carrying a high glycemic load. And if you've heard that, that is when you eat them, it spikes your blood sugar a lot higher than something with more fiber in it and more vitamins and nutrients. So it really spikes your blood sugar. It doesn't give your body a lot to work with. And unfortunately, that can also lead to that crash not so soon after. And research from Harvard Medical studies have found a link between these refined sugars and feelings of depression. Because you can think about all of these ups and downs of our blood sugar can also really throw out of whack a lot of the stability that our body is used to. We're always striving towards homeostasis. And so these recent studies have found a link between constant blood sugar spikes and drops and an increased risk of mental health issues like depression. Because we're always, again, striving for that stable, keeping everything kind of moving on a lower plane. So when we're dropping and crashing, it's not good for us. They mess with our nervous system and lead to the production of stress hormones in response as well. And again, these sugars feed that bad gut bacteria, can cause that inflammation in our gut and disrupt that production of serotonin. And then these ultra processed and fast foods, how do they, contribute to anxiety? So again, they're high in a lot of additives, added sodium, added fats, especially, high in saturated fat. Unsaturated fat is better for us, but the saturated fat that builds up can cause blockages. And again, not all fats are bad. Good to emphasize that our brain does need healthy fats to function. You've heard, omega-3s and the oily fish, avocados. Our brain does need that unsaturated fat. But again, that saturated fat can build up, increase our cholesterol, cause, blockages in our arteries, cause our heart to work a little harder. So in that same Harvard medical research study, they found that an increased diet of these ultra processed foods high in saturated fat can affect how our brain works, and can decrease our cognitive processes, leading to, over time, a higher rate of cognitive decline. So later in life, if we're thinking, okay, I want to be sharp, super sharp when I'm, 89, 90, eating a lot of these foods can put you at a disadvantage for that goal, and can lead to depression, anxiety, these mental health conditions, not to mention, again, causing that gut inflammation. And then this should be, not a surprise to anyone, but diet high in caffeinated beverages and alcohol can increase feelings of stress. Of course, we know caffeine has an effect. Sometimes we need it, that morning wake up. And, everything in moderation, but specifically in excess or consistent, long-term over the day. Like if you're constantly drinking caffeinated beverages, especially these energy drinks that have a lot of sugar in them, can really mess with how our stress levels are fluctuating. So caffeine is a stimulant. We all know that, and can cause our body to continue to overproduce cortisol throughout the day. So, limiting your caffeine consumption, if you want to just keep it to, 1 cup of coffee a day, trying to not keep your body in fight or flight all the time. Because even when that effect wears off, then your body's going to start overproducing those stress hormones. And you might think, okay, well, alcohol, sometimes, that glass of wine or beer at the end of the day, it actually feels relaxing. So, and alcohol is a depressant, but again, it works on the stress hormones in the same way. If we are depressing our functioning, our body's going to work harder to produce that cortisol to keep up. And if we're making it a habit, constantly, relying on that alcoholic beverage at the end of the day, our body's going to get in that state of stress, and you might wake up feeling anxiety or stress because your body's trying to overcompensate of how you push that down. And again, these two things also can irritate that gut lining. So specifically, alcohol can be really inflammatory to our gut. Sometimes people even feel it the next day, where their stomach's just a little off if they had, a night out. And caffeine too. Certain caffeinated beverages can really irritate that gut lining. So just being aware that I'm not saying, never eat any of these foods, because I think that's unrealistic. Sometimes it's just a situation where, we're out with friends, we want to have a cake at someone's birthday, but being aware that the more we incorporate these into our daily life and our daily diet, the more our gut might not feel great and our mind might follow in suit and not feel great. Um, I want to see if anyone remembers this Arby's campaign, because the other places I presented this at didn't really react, but I remember this and I think this is very funny because Arby's would be a good example of bad mood food, or, it's very, all processed inflammatory stuff, no shade to Arby's, but let's talk about what actually would be good mood food. So whole foods, and not the store. I'm not advertising the store, but foods that you can get as close to a single ingredient as you can, because those are usually full of vitamins, nutrients, your fruits, your vegetables, um, you know, eggs, bring a banana in, things that are as close to where their original state, nuts, um, seeds, sunflower seeds, peanuts, stuff like that. They have a lot of nutrients for our body to use and our mind to use. And they don't give that added processed inflammation that a lot of those processed foods carry. So whole foods can be a great thing to rely on if you're looking for a snack as close to that, single ingredient, because there's a lot of, healthy snacks out there, that are, protein's the big craze these days. So you're seeing snacks with added protein, but sometimes a simple apple is, a good snack. It'll fill you up for the time being, help you keep going. Handful of nuts. Sometimes that's all you need. Break it down to simple. Specifically for our mood, our brain, like I said, those omega-3 fatty acids. So that's, oily fish. It really helps the brain with the membrane that makes up the brain and the blood-brain barrier that keeps your brain protected from all the stuff your body might be encountering. So, seeds also carry these, but if you're thinking, okay, we're going to have fish this week, maybe pick an oily fish high in omega-3 fatty acids. Salmon is a great one. I'm a big fan of salmon. Antioxidants. Now, this is a term kind of thrown around a lot, but just to break it down, really helps defend against inflammation. It helps your cells defend against any kind of inflammation or damage that happens throughout the day through sun exposure, exposure to toxins. We're just walking around outside. Things, our cells get exposed to all kinds of things, and specifically helps prevent against that oxidative stress. So antioxidants, foods in, they're high in blueberries, leafy greens, cabbage, beets, all can be really great for the cells in your body, cells in your brain, cells in your gut. And again, anything good for your gut is good for your brain. So if you're thinking about, I've been really kind of off lately, maybe I'm not getting enough sleep, maybe I need to exercise more, but also looking at your diet, what you're putting into your digestive tract could be impacting your general disposition, how you're feeling. So that's kind of my rule of thumb. It's good for your gut. It's going to make your stomach feel good. It's good for your brain. And then just to kind of wrap this all up, because there's a lot more that goes into eating healthy foods than just do it. It's a lot more nuanced than that. So some of the common things that can prevent us from making these healthy choices, a lot of times it's stress eating. And, your body at that point is just kind of craving that distraction, that quick dopamine release. And that's another neurotransmitter, that kind of, you hear it a lot with social media or, scrolling. It will release that dopamine, but that's that short term. So your brain is just looking for something to do. You're looking to relieve some of the stress or have some of a distraction. But a lot of times people don't have as much thought behind it and can lean towards more unhealthy options. You're craving just something. So really creating a plan for that. If after a long day at work, you're hungry and you usually just go into the cupboard, having snacks maybe in your car, some nuts in your car that you can just pop in your mouth on the way home, so you're not so hungry when you're home and you're not stress eating. Choosing those healthier snack options, keeping them around, strategizing, and then practicing mindful eating, I think is important too. And what that means is really just, put the phone away, don't look at the TV, really focus on what you're eating, how it's making you feel. And I feel like that's even easier said than done. A lot of people nowadays are very used to having that distraction, and I'm guilty of it too. It's easier to just, okay, what do I want to, brain break right now? I'll eat and I'll watch something on my phone for my lunch break. But really focusing on what you're eating, being present in the moment. Angry, that can often lead to having a little less planned out meals. But again, keeping that snack option around in those places that maybe you do get more hungry. If you're about to go grocery shopping, make sure you're not doing it on an empty stomach because you might pick, those things really quick. That's a big one. And kind of just keeping that blood sugar regular, making sure you're not, a lot of people can have a big mood shift if their blood sugar's lower than their functioning is meant to be. So keeping that in mind, keeping regular snacks around. And then on a budget, thinking about the cost of things, there can be a misconception that, okay, well, eating healthy is so expensive. And I would argue nowadays that even eating unhealthy is more expensive. If you go through the fast food drive through, like some of these value meals are already up to like $15, $20. It's not even worth the price anymore. That argument's kind of fallen away. So looking at the stores for what can I get, a lot of these fresh fruits and vegetables are at the end of the day cheaper than getting a lot of these packaged processed foods, but also frozen foods, canned foods, they're just as good. They carry the same nutrients. Oftentimes they're preserved at like their peak state of freshness. So, do what you can with your budget. It's kind of like a gross time of year. There's not a ton of farmers markets, but that's coming up soon. And that's always my best advice because, eating in season can be a lot cheaper on the wallet too. When the farms have, okay, I have this I grew a lot of. You can go to the farmers market, see what they have, see the deals, and can be a lot better too for a budget. But the key takeaways I have, just to sum it all up, limiting processed foods as much as you can. Again, being realistic, sometimes it's going to happen. It's not the end of the world if okay, tonight's my takeout night because I don't have a lot of time. But limiting them because they can be inflammatory to the gut, especially foods high in saturated fat, sugar, and they can negatively affect our mood, our mental health. And then focus on those gut healthy foods, fruits, veggies, whole grains, keeping it simple. They're great for the body and the mind. And then my last mental health PSA, keeping an open mind. If you're trying all these things in your life, fixing your sleep, you're exercising, you're trying to get your diet, but you're still just not feeling right, you're feeling off, not being afraid to seek help, talking to friends, family about your mental health can help a great deal. But that is all I have on food and mood. If anyone has any questions, if anyone online has any questions, you can pop it in the chat. Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. And I do for
Everything.
for everyone in person.
And also, you guys, you got my email yesterday about this nutrition month. I talked about fiber, and this, I don't know if you looked at that, but there were some things on that about similar to this that I don't know why this won't come up. Okay, so that Zen basil seeds. Did you guys read about that? So in 2 tablespoons, there's 15 grams of fiber. When she was talking about that, I was like, have you heard of those, Allie? I know. So I follow this doctor she's an orthopedic surgeon who is also a nutritionist.
Okay.
And her name is Dr. Vonda Wright. And yeah, because she's like crazy about like health right now. She's really into like hormones and all that kind of stuff. But she talks a lot about this, and it's really interesting because I just think it's you know, kind of cool. No, that's okay. This was in there. Anyway, I've been eating them like every day since I've learned about them. And yeah, they're great. They're awesome. So
Are they big or do you like put them in?
they look just like chia seeds,
Okay.
and you do soak them for like 3 to 5 minutes before using them. But yeah, they're great, and they're like an easy way of getting 15. Thank you. Take care, guys. I'm getting 15 grams in 5